So returning to the levels of organization, we will move on to the cellular level. Cells are described as the smallest autonomous units of life. And here the term autonomous means that the cell has control over its own internal workings and processes. Cells are made of many of the molecules that we had just discussed in the previous segment. Our bodies contain an estimated 50 to 100 trillion cells on average. And we have approximately 200 different cell types in the human body because cells are highly specialized to carry out extremely specific functions and tasks. So regardless of the type of cell, most cells are going to share the same basic components. And some of these basic components are a plasma membrane, the cytosol, and the organelles. So the plasma membrane is a barrier that is composed of a lipid called a phospholipid. And the plasma membrane functions as the boundary between the inside of the cell and the outside of the cell. The cytosol, on the other hand, is a gel-like fluid that exists inside of the cell, so that it makes up the internal environment of the cells. And finally, we have the organelles, which is a term that means little organs, and the organelles are suspended within the cytosol, and they carry out very specific tasks and functions within that particular cell. So from cells, we can build tissues, and tissues are groups of similar cells that have a common function or purpose. We're going to examine and encounter 4 tissue types within the human body. The first is the epithelial tissues, and the epithelial tissues cover the body's surfaces and line the body's cavities. Muscular tissues are going to produce movement by contracting or shortening. Next, we have connective tissues, and connective tissues are the tissues that bind, connect, and support all of the other tissues of the body. And they also have protective functions as well. So for example, in the image on the left here, we have an external ear, which is mostly composed of cartilage. The cartilage of the external ear is going to function in support of that structure. On the right, the image on the right, we have muscles in kind of the dark red that are connected to the kind of whitish tan tendons. And tendons function to connect muscles to bones so that the tendons can transmit the pulling forces of muscles to those bones and move the skeleton. Last, we have nervous tissue, and nervous tissue functions in signaling and communicating with the other body cells and tissues. So next we move on to the organ level of organization. And an organ is a discrete structure that is composed of 2 or more tissues that we had just discussed. Typically an organ will contain all 4 tissue types, and a couple of example organs are things like blood vessels, bones, skeletal muscles, and the brain. And in fact, most of the individual structures that we're going to be studying in this class are organs. Organs that work together to accomplish a common goal or purpose are referred to as an organ system. We'll see that there are 11 organ systems in the human body, and their structures and functions are going to be explored in a little bit more detail in Lab 1. So this diagram here illustrates the fact that the organ systems are interconnected and dependent upon one another. The integumentary system, which includes our skin, is going to protect the deeper internal organs and tissues. The respiratory system in the upper right corner of this diagram is going to be delivering oxygen to the blood and removing carbon dioxide waste that results from the breakdown of glucose. The digestive system on the left is going to take in food nutrients and digest or break them down, and then deliver them to the bloodstream. The cardiovascular system in the center of the diagram is going to shuttle the nutrients and the oxygen that's in the blood to all of the body's cells and tissues. And finally, the urinary system, which is in the lower right corner of this diagram, is going to remove nitrogen-containing waste from the blood. And it's going to remove excess ions such as sodium and potassium. And finally, we have the organismal level of organization, which represents all of the 11 organ systems working together to maintain very stable internal conditions. And here I use the term stable internal conditions very specifically because This is going to lead us into our next topic, which is called homeostasis.